You knuckleheads ain't even worth the effort. You just got dominated by a handsome man and a frightening head. Deal with it!
Hello everybody, it's Daniel here, bringing you a Team Fortress 2 gameplay commentary, and as you may have noticed by the start of this video, we have another snazzy new intro. Thank you again to SirRoborex, because now we have an intro specifically for Scout. I wonder where this could go, being TF2, a game with 9 classes. And you might notice something that's happening here. This is the first time we're playing a class out of an engineer the last while. So keep an eye out for that over the next couple of commentaries. It's gonna be great, and seriously, this is so cool. Like, thank you so much, man. Today we're playing some Scout though, as you can see, and these are some remarkable games I had as Scout. My idea was that before I go on for experimenting with more loadouts, I want to try and get back to some of the basic things in TF2, and for that reason, I'm using a default scattergun here. And to my surprise, having not played Scout probably since the Soda commentary, and probably before that, for several months, it's actually an amazing couple of rounds. Like, I do remarkably well here, and I genuinely surprised myself. Like, these are probably the best rounds of Scout that I've ever had in the entire duration I've been playing TF2, and it's really out of the blue because I've been out of practice so long, so hopefully things can only go up from this point. Like, you can see a lot of things in this gameplay where I'm just out of shape as Scout. Like, I'm not someone who can kind of like jump around the enemy that much. I do kind of have to just strafe a lot into the enemy and then just kind of fire. I'm not great at actually flicking the mouse in the general vicinity of the enemy. So like, it's kind of like play it safe, but here it plays really, really well. So genuinely, these are probably the best rounds of Scout I've ever had, and I hope I can only do better. Because on the topic of experimenting further with loadouts, turns out there's a couple of classes in TF2 that encourage this a lot more than others. And the reason that they encourage it is because they just have a wide array of weapons that actually make a difference. And that's what we're talking about today, weapons that make a difference. And it's kind of funny to be talking about this, actually, considering we are using scattergun here, but it's something that's you're going to see cropping up in the next couple of commentaries, because there's a whole bunch of Scout ones on the way, where I'm basically trying as many loadout combinations as I can. And remember, it's loadout combinations that actually make sense. See the previous video for an example of loadouts that don't make sense, because that's why that's there. I needed to address that before I went any further with this. Scout really does have a lot of options though, even if you compare it to something like Engineer. Because, thinking about it for Engineer, like, there's experimentation quickly dies because there's actually not a lot of options available to the class. And I think that shows up most in your secondary weapon slot, because as an Engineer, you've got 3 options for your secondary weapon. You can use a pistol, you can use a Wrangler, you can use a short circuit. That's it. Like, there's nothing else. So, really restricted there. And if you compare that to something like Scout, even for a secondary slot, you have a pistol. So already one of those weapons is being transferred, but then you have Mad Milk, Bonk, Criticola, Pocket Pistol, the Winger, you have a Guillotine. Like, there's so many options there, and they pair so well with a lot of the other weapons, because, again, if you take it for something like Engineer, a lot of those weapons seem to function in isolation. Like, if you're trying to play a nested Engineer playstyle, you just take either a Wrangler or a Short Circuit, that's your choice. If you're playing a bit more aggressive, you take a pistol. That's how it goes. You don't really think about it in relation to the shotgun too much. A couple of exceptions would be something like, don't take the Short Circuit if you have a panic attack, because that's a terrible idea. Maybe you consider a pistol if you have a Widowmaker, because then you have some ammo on hand. But it kind of wears out quite quickly. It just depends on the playstyle that you're really going for as Engineer. Whereas again, Scout, they complement a lot more. Like, Criticola you can use with a lot of things. Backscatter you can use with a lot of things. Like, I'm sorry, Bonk. I meant to say you can use like Bonk with stuff like the Backscatter, and you can use it with stuff like the Force of Nature as well, where you're trying to play a bit more sneaky. Again, Guillotine as well. Like, you can just take a Sandman on pretty much any scattergun, and you have like a little 2-hit combo there that's really, really difficult to pull off, but fantastic if you actually get it. It's just really effective, and they're really malleable in terms of weapons. Like, you can just mold these things together to form the loadout you desire, whereas like Engineer is kind of restricted to the 2 sort of optimum playstyles. You either nest or you're a mini sentry. You kind of do one of those 2 things. The way I'd go about viewing it is that Scout is pretty much the pick and mix class of TF2, because almost everything you have available works in some capacity by itself, and then it'll complement in just so many ways. Like, almost every melee will work with almost every primary, and the same with the secondaries. There's so much variety, and it's actually incredible. if you go into it, like, I challenge you to find a rubbish scout loadout. Something that just does not work to any capacity. The best I could do to find a scout loadout that simply does not work is pretty much ones with the Babyface's blaster and things to do with jump height. So say Babyface's blaster, the winger, and the sun on a stick. Just to throw that in there for that very specific thing. But even in a scenario like that, like, you have like some very specific tools, and you still have the Babyface's blaster as well. You don't necessarily have to use the other things, and you're still going to be able to do relatively okay. Like, you may even argue that the sun on the stick is actually good on the Babyface's blaster, because you can run up to your enemy very quickly and hit them while they're still on fire. And that actually is, like, not a bad idea. It's not great, there's probably better, but it's not, like, terrible. You can still kind of function. You're not going to, like, shoot yourself in the foot with something like that. The biggest weapon that conflicts here is the winger, because the increase in jump height conflicts with the boost mechanic of the Babyface's blaster. But if you don't actually use the winger, you're not at too big of a setback. Yes, you don't have a secondary, but you still have a Babyface's blaster, which is a very solid weapon in itself. And you can still function just on that alone. Like, you're just playing a scout, and just assume that you've thrown your mad milk so far that you can't recharge it. That's how you could view it. And you could even argue a few times that you jump out of boost and you're trying to get up that ledge height, that extra jump height is a valuable thing to have. I'm not going to argue it, but it is possible to say that. So this great versatility that we see in Scout is because almost every weapon available to the class makes a difference in some capacity. They do actually change the way you play, yet they don't change to the degree where you actually do anything radically different. It's a kind of weird paradox that's going on. Because if you think about it like this, if every option works as Scout, does anything actually work? Does it actually matter what weapons you equip? And the answer is still yes, despite it being still the sort of basic Scout class that you're going to play. And I think this is largely in part to the fact that none of the primaries radically change things, they just tweak them constantly. And it's like, even with stuff like between the Scatter's Gun and the Force of Nature, you're still using a form of scattergun, you're still getting behind a guy, and you're still trying to get that meat shot off on them and rack up as much damage as you can. And the stuff you do after that shot, whereas with the regular scattergun you kind of chase them and try and get a couple more shots, whereas Force of Nature you back off a moment and reload. That's what kind of changes there, but you see how that kind of tweak makes it so that if you're familiar with the scattergun, you only have to adjust your mindset slightly to actually use something like the Force of Nature effectively. And that's what's just so great, because when it comes to playing Scout like that, once you get familiar with the class, you can just try whatever you like, because you've got the base details sort of down, and you're just free to go. And now you might argue that this is something that holds true for all of the classes in TF2, because surely all heavies shoot with their miniguns, surely all medics heal with their mediguns, surely all pyros deal flame damage. That was a bad way of saying setting people on fire, but flame damage to their enemies. And you are in part right. Like, I can't defend heavy, you are using your minigun all the time. But with stuff like the medic, that's not strictly true, because your Uber has completely changed and the rate you're healing people has completely changed. Because of that, you kind of change your playstyle. Like, if you even view the difference between the regular medigun and the quick fix, you have one class that heals everyone and one that's much more encouraged to pocket someone and then push through choke points, whereas the other is just a general let's keep everyone alive. And that kind of changes it, because if you look at Scout's options, nothing changes it that radically to that degree. Even stuff like Pyro, you can kind of see that there is that big difference there, because default Flamethrower, you're going to have fire damage and you're going to heal people, well, you're going to heal yourself with your air blasts, and deal damage with your afterburn, but with something like the Degreaser, you're going to be switching to your secondary weapons a lot more, so you're actually kind of playing the class a little bit differently there in terms of your weapons. All the Scout scatterguns, you're going to fire them as a scattergun, regardless whether they have like a little bit of increased aim or not. There's none being affected here like projectile speed, which again, if you compare it to something like Soldier, the direct hit is significantly different to a rocket launcher, because one aims for body shots, one kind of aims for the ground where the enemy's standing, because one has splash radius, one really doesn't. It's like the difference between a demo man and a demo knight. And I think that's the best way I can explain it, because a Scout does not have a Scout Knight, or the Scout Guillotine Knight. Like, it doesn't really work like that, because you still have that scattergun there. You don't have boots that you slip on, you don't forsake your scattergun, whereas a demo man, it's completely different, and that's why that distinction is there. And just to add to the paradoxes that we have going on with Scout here, it's sort of almost like a purist class, despite the huge variety of options it has available to it, because the base gameplay just doesn't change in the slightest. Again, compared to like soldier rocket launchers, and you have these radical differences cropping up that would change the way you play. Beggar's Bazooka, Cow Mangler, Direct Hit. Whereas with Scout, Scattergun. Variety of Scattergun, another variety of Scattergun. It's very strange, like the class with the most options that actually work is like the purest one, like the original Scout. Like the concept is pretty much still intact, and you don't really see it changed. If you see a Scout, he's shooting you with a scattergun. He might switch to a guillotine for a moment, but he's using that scattergun. There's no other thing he can use. So to sum up, we have a lot of weird paradoxes going on with Scout. We have the most options in terms of like loadouts because everything works with everything, and yet we still have a singular sort of gameplay style that is always played, no matter what that loadout. You can experiment as much as you like and come up with your own unique playstyle for Scout, and yet it's going to be the same as everyone else's. You share in that uniqueness because Scout is so standard when you think of all of these things together, because you're still back to that scattergun and the emphasis on it. So experiment as much as you like with Scout, because the result is going to be the same. You're going to be a Scout. And that's just really interesting when it comes to an experimenter's point of view for loadouts on this class. But anyway, I hope that makes sense. I hope people didn't get lost going along with this, because I sure as hell did. But that's going to be it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you with something new soon. Goodbye, and thank you so much for watching.